Episode 296, Sherianna Boyle, psychic healer, speaker, and author.
I'm honest when I'm brutally honest, and it's not always received well.
I'm Mark Graban. This is My Favorite Mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes, but what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth, and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. To learn more about Sherianna, her work, her books, including her new one, look for links in the show notes or go to markgraban.com/mistake296. Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Sherianna Boyle. She is a renowned psychic healer, speaker, and the founder of Emotional Detox Coaching and the Cleanse Method. Sherianna is the author of 11 books, including the best-selling Energy in Action, The Power of Emotions and Intuition to Cultivate Peace and Freedom. With more than 25 years of experience in mental health and wellness, Sherianna integrates psychology, energy healing, and spirituality in her work. Her podcast called Just Ask Spirit is in the top 5% globally, and she's been featured in major media outlets like Psychology Today, Yoga Journal, and Prevention. So Sherianna, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We'll talk about your work and your books later on. Upcoming book, same name as the podcast, Just Ask Spirit, right?
That's right. Yep.
So that's in pre-order status.
Pre-order status, yeah.
As we're recording this here on October 22nd. Do you have a release date for the new book yet?
It's sometime in January, towards the end of January. And if they go to justaskspiritbook.com, then they can get a free gift for pre-ordering the book there.
Okay. Well, great. So before we come back to that that topic of your books and your work, we're going to start the way we normally do here, Sherianna. With everything you've done in your career, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
I love that question. And I particularly love that word favorite stands out.
Yeah.
And so I think favorite mistake is when I'm honest, when I'm brutally honest, and it's not always received well. And it takes courage to be transparent, takes courage to speak your truth. And I think sometimes it felt like a mistake at the time. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said it, or maybe I should have said something different, because we don't have control over how somebody receives it when we choose to be honest. And at the time, it felt like a mistake because sometimes people choose not to. They get upset, they get hurt. And I've lost friendships that way, just being honest about how I feel or where I'm at or my boundaries, trying to put in a boundary, things like that, trying to slow down the pace of some things. And that led to losing a relationship. So friendships, couple friendships. Mm-hmm. And that felt at the time like a mistake. But now I realize that I learned so much from it. And it was essential for my growth, as I'm not really sure if I believe in mistakes. I think they're opportunities for growth if you treat them in that way.
Mm-hmm. Is there, so I mean, I hear you kind of describing, I don't know if pattern's the right word, it's happened more than once, or is there one of those stories, kind of like in particular, I don't want to ask you to share a story that's too uncomfortable, but is there to kind of bring that to life for us in terms of, kind of that, as you put it, that brutal honesty, or what went into, does the brutal honesty just come out, or do you
think it's more in business? It hasn't, more in business. And when you have relationships that kind of become friendships and you're working together and you develop projects together, partnerships together. And then, as many people can relate, sometimes one person just starts to feel like maybe their feelings are changing. And so that was the position I was in. And some of the things were fantastic. It wasn't a reflection of the project itself or the situation itself. I think that's why it can be so confusing, Mark, is because I think sometimes we ask ourselves, why do I feel this way? Everything's fine. Why am I feeling a change of heart? Why am I feeling like this is an alignment? Why am I feeling? And for me, it was really about, it wasn't about the success. It was about the fact of having my voice and being connected to my truth and moving at the pace that I prefer to move at, because sometimes we're just not aligned because our paces are different. Our work styles are different. The way that we handle conversations might be different. So there's so many different variables. So yeah, it's those mistakes, quote unquote, that really kind of get us to move to that next level. And I've learned a lot. I've learned to slow down and not jump into things so quickly from those couple of those situations that occurred. I thought, okay, I've really got to pause and pay attention and really give myself time before I jump into something. But at the same time, I think that I handled everything really well. So I think we have to look back and be a little easier on ourselves and realize that some of the things we're calling a mistake are just life, life happenings.
Well, and I mean, I think, maybe, digging a little bit of, what is a mistake? I mean, there's one dictionary definition I kind of fall back on of, taking action, for example, of saying something, we thought that was the right thing to do. And then at some point, maybe we think, oh, well, it was not the right thing to do. And I think we can, reflect on that without beating ourselves up or shaming ourselves for it. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. But, I'd be curious, kind of hear more about your reflection around, I think it's really interesting. You talked about how, at least in one example or maybe others, you thought it was a mistake, but then you came to view it differently.
Yeah.
And, maybe some of that in the context of, like you said, you can't control how others react.
No, you can't. And I think also the mistakes, which I'm sure people can relate to, are a lot of people don't talk face to face anymore. And I think that's one thing, is when learning not to have some of those harder conversations over email, or they just don't seem to go well, those more tender conversations. And the challenge is not everybody's up for that. You're met with, okay, I need to have this conversation, but maybe the person on the other side is trying to have that conversation through email. So it's a two-way street. And oops, so sorry about that. My daughter's coming in.
Special guest.
Special guest. Okay.
She was a blur.
Hello. Anyway, so I think that there's so much to learn, but at the same time, that's where we have to cut ourselves some slack. I mean, we do the best we can. And in those situations, which can be emotional, can be intense. And again, I'm not in control of how things are received. And I think sometimes not all relationships are supposed to last forever. Some of them are short term or shorter in term than others. And that's okay. And because then you have new relationships that come in.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring up interesting points about the mode of communication. It could be a mistake to text somebody when it should have been a phone call. I've made the mistake of sending an email when it should have been a phone call, because there's nuance that's lost. You're not getting real-time feedback. about the message that you're sending, where, a phone call, you lose some body language, but, I think so when we're face-to-face phone call, is a Zoom call as good as face-to-face? I mean, we have these choices where it could be a mistake of not just what we communicated, but how we did it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the delivery, the methodology. Yeah. But again, I think we do the best that we can. And sometimes that is, when a lot of business relationships happen with people that live across the country or in other states. And so you work with what you have. And the thing about me is I don't hold grudges, and I know how to forgive. And I think that's one of my strengths is I know how to forgive myself, forgive others. I'm pretty good at forgiving right away. And I'm also pretty good at owning my part. I recognize that my part I play a role. And so not everyone's good at that, Mark.
Yeah.
And when the other side isn't good at that, like some people, they just hold on. It makes it feel like, ooh, they're holding on. That was a big mistake. But is it that they're holding on, or is it that they just haven't forgiven? So it gives this sort of impression, because for me, it's like we could just forgive each other and love each other and move on and just learn and grow from this experience. But that's how I am. And if I make a mistake, I do own it and I do apologize. And in those situations, I did within 48 hours. It's sort of my policy. Within a couple of days, I want to be owning something, because I don't, otherwise it does go into burial. You start burying things and it builds intensity that way. So, and it's genuine. It's not a fake apology. It's a real true, genuine. I don't like to hurt anybody. I don't like to, come across in a way where anything's hurtful, but not everybody knows how to let things go and forgive. So it compounds and makes it seem like, oh, this is a really big mistake because we don't talk anymore. When in essence, you could talk, right? So I think you have to kind of look at, there's so many variables and different ways of seeing this.
Yeah. Well, and I think, if we reflect on an interaction, and I think, you use this phrase brutally honest. So like, to me, there's almost an implication there of, was it a question of what you said, how you delivered it, or it could have been, depending on how you're using that phrase, brutally honest. Some people don't like being disagreed with. That could have nothing to do with what you said or how you said it. I mean, depending on the situation, or, so that's where sometimes a particular story, makes it a little easier to reflect. Like in that situation, back to the question of, is there something I would do differently in the future, or maybe not? Right?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. I mean, the honesty, it wasn't hurtful. It was, when people say to you, well, they ask you a question, they say, be honest with me. That's kind of a setup.
It may or may not be.
It can be. Well, that's what it turned out to be for me. It was a little bit of a setup because I was honest, and I gave honest feedback about why, I was making the decision I was making, and that person got hurt. So again, I was honest. They asked me to be honest. It wasn't anything hurtful. Again, it's business. And I think it's not personal. It's not about the person. It's business. And I think women in particular, have a hard time with this in business. Sometimes, I wonder if it were two males playing that scenario out, if it would have been a little bit different. I mean, not that men don't get hurt now and then, but it just felt like sometimes.
Men, well, again, so it could be different reasons. It's not even so much that they're sensitive, but they don't like to be disagreed with. They don't like to be told that they're wrong. They can't handle that. I mean, I imagine sometimes women have that personality too. Right? Yeah.
Perhaps it's not a gender thing. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I have no expertise in generalizations of men are from, what was that book about Mars and
Men are from
Venus?
Mars. Yeah, men are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And maybe just, one other question, just to that theme of, that type of mistake that you shared with us. I mean, I think, maybe there's a question of, can you brace somebody for the brutal honesty? And it just seems so situational, because like when that person said, hey, give me honest feedback, and you could have said, well, hey, brace yourself. Or less obviously, you might say, well, you might not like to hear this, or I don't like, maybe that doesn't matter. It depends on the person and your relationship with them, or their personality of, they thought they could handle honest feedback, and maybe that was a mistake in thinking so.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's business. It's nothing personal. And if you ask me to be honest and you want it, I interpreted that as, you want honest feedback so that you can grow, so you can learn. Right. I mean, that's why I want honest feedback about my business. And I get feedback all the time from clients or people I work with will say, can I give you a suggestion? Can I give you some feedback? It would have been great if, whatever it is. I don't know any examples off the top of my head, but people have definitely, and I think asking for it first is a good communication skill. When somebody says, may I give you honest feedback? Right. In this case, they did ask, but it was more casual. So I agree. I don't know if I think they were very much in their head already. I don't think I could have said anything. I think they already made their decision of what they thought. They were mind reading me or assuming, or had already come up with a lot of stories on their own. So I think I was a little late to the game personally, that already in a lot of reactivity. So I'm not sure if I could have said it any differently.
Yeah. Well, our guest today, Sherianna Boyle, has written a number of books, and I want to ask about some of the work and some of the terminology that you use, whether it's related to any of the stories that came to mind for you. So, first off, the idea of emotional detox coaching and processing emotions. Maybe, another way to talk through some of this is, what advice would you have for others who are struggling with having made a mistake? And there's a lot of emotions involved in that, right?
I think the word mistake can be a little triggering, quite frankly. I'm going to be honest with you. I think a lot of emotional detoxes, and what we're clearing is we're not getting rid of emotions. That's to be clear. So in that work, emotional detox is not getting rid of emotions, it's getting to them.
Yeah.
And really being clear about the difference between a reaction and a true emotion. And true feeling will calm us down. Yeah. Reacting will pull us apart. And so triggers are often unconscious, and triggers could be that something was already in someone. So I already had a trigger about something. Maybe I felt insecure about myself, or something happened perhaps in my history, or some kind of memory or feeling. Sometimes a trigger is just a feeling inside, a feeling of not being good enough, or a feeling of not being worthy. And we trigger that. Now, did I cause the trigger? No, I'm a mirror to that person for the trigger. And they're a mirror to me for my triggers. And so when we get triggered, it's, that is when we know that there's something inside of us that is unhealed, and something inside of us that there's a wound there, there's an emotional wound. And so in terms of, well, what are we detoxing? We are detoxing the reactions. So whether it is a reaction, can be something someone says, it can be yelling, it can be saying blocking someone on social media or whatever. I mean, these are reactions, or saying, I'm done with you. That's a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so we clear them in emotional detox. That's what we're cleansing, so that we can get to the emotions underneath of that, which
Mm-hmm.
likely could be sadness or grief, or I'm not really sure. You have to kind of take situation by situation, and you can process those feelings, which likely we've been carrying with us for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not even know where the original point is of that trigger. Sometimes it's genetic, there's things called epigenetics, which is we can inherit emotions. And so that's what we're clearing, so that we can get to the true feeling, which feeling is what brings us close together again. Feeling is the healing, is the connection, is the awareness, it's the consciousness, it is the deeper understanding, it's the empathy, it's the compassion. But you can't get to those higher level emotions if you're riddled in reactivity.
And so, do I hear you right when you say we might not be able to pinpoint what the source of that emotional wound is? It could go back, you say, back to this epigenetics.
It can be genetic. We can carry it with us. We can feel like, and that when you're like, oh, gee, I feel like my mom, or gee, my dad, and you see sort of these patterns that could be some of it. You see these wounding patterns, like, for example, like a victim consciousness. I've seen a lot of people feeling very like victims. I feel like that can sometimes go way back, further than we know.
And can that be explored in talking with a counselor, a therapist, talking with your parents if they're still alive, to try to understand? I mean, how might somebody, if somebody was trying to figure out the root of that, what resources or approaches would you recommend?
Well, an emotional detox, I provide the cleanse, and that's what really helped me, because I wrote it actually during a time period. I did not intend to write it during a time period like where I was going through a lot of emotional trauma. And I wrote the book, even though I didn't want to write the book, but I had started it before the trauma. And I said to the publisher, I can't write this book. I can't write a book on emotional detox. I'm going through it right now. And they were like, you're going to write this book. Just take your time. And so I did. And so I really it was like a journey of healing. So I was going through it as I was writing it. I was also channeling. So I channel spirit, and spirit was giving me the steps for the cleanse. So your question is, yes, you could, of course, talk to a therapist. There are many, many avenues. Energy healing is what I do for people. I do emotional cleansing and energy healing and awareness. I use what I created in my books. That's how I approach everything. I also help people connect to spirit and tune into their own inner guidance and clarity and support, because I find spirit is extremely wise and will help us get to the root of things. Yeah. And I think sometimes with talk therapy, you kind of can circle around it and around it and around it. Fine. That's why I love working with spirit and teaching about spirit, because it's like, whoa, that was good information. Yeah. Didn't have that in my awareness. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about. The first step is always awareness. And your open and willingness to even just start to talk about it a little bit and say, and sometimes it's just hearing someone else's story. That's why I love podcasting, because sometimes you hear someone like me talking and you weren't even aware that you're carrying something until you hear their story and you're like, oh, okay. I see myself here. That's the beginning of growth and healing as well.
And so when you say spirit, and with the podcast and the book title of Just Ask Spirit, tell us a little bit more about what even that word spirit means. It's not asking a spirit, or is a spirit, or like the use of that word.
It's broad. I mean, it's broad. It's spirit is consciousness. Spirit is awareness. Spirit is it's energy. And when you connect to energy and consciousness, you can connect to spiritual realms and spiritual guides. And so what Just As Spirit talks about is when I choose to block my emotions, I also simultaneously will block my connection to spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I choose to process what I feel, so it's very similar to emotional detox, but what it's doing is emotional detox. There's 3 books in that series. And emotional detox teaches you really how to process your emotions. And Just As Spirit takes it to the next place. Okay, great. You can process your emotions and connect to spirit at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it does both. And so I open up that invitation for support. And that's the thing. When we go through things like a mistake, which can be very difficult and very, mm-hmm. There is support. I teach psychology at a college, and I asked my students last week, we were talking about the brain and problems and thinking. And I asked them, how do you solve problems? Or how do you, what do you do? And we kind of had to unpack it because at first they weren't really. And then it was, okay, what is the problem? Right. So let's start there. They didn't know how to solve what we were talking about. So I said, okay, let's get clear on what the problem is. So we got clear, and with a little bit of coaching from me, and what we identified as a class is a lot of people feel unsupported. Mm-hmm. Okay. They don't feel like they have enough support in what they do. And then once we got that, okay, the problem is I feel unsupported. Right. And then when I asked them, well, how do you get that support? Not one person, I have 32 students in that class, said, I have support in spirit. Mm-hmm. There's not one person alluded to the fact that you can ask and receive from your spirit guides. Mm. And it's just not, we just don't think like that. Right? It's just not the norm.
I don't. Yeah. That's why I'm curious about it.
Yeah. Nobody does. And yet it's abundant. Mm-hmm. And it's powerful to the point now where some of my clients, literally, I have one client today that called me. She texted me because something happened at work. And I said, I gave her some, we talked back and forth a little bit. And she said, I really don't want to do anything until we connect to spirit. Mm-hmm. And she's learning. There's more to know here, and I want to connect and get that guidance and support before I make a decision about what I'm doing here. So that's progress. Like, that's someone who's like, whoa, she's fully aware. I want to check with my team, my spiritual team. Mm-hmm. Because they're with me and behind me 100%, and I can trust them. But it took us time to get there.
Mm-hmm. So, the book, tell us a little bit more about the book of, like, who do you think is, who's this book ideal for? Types of situations people might be struggling with, where this book would be most helpful.
Anyone who's interested in self-help, mental health, spirituality, looking for a little bit of a spiritual twist to your mental health, self-care, looking for something a little bit different than talk therapy. Yeah, it's not either or. I always say it's in addition to. Mm-hmm. This is something, a lot of self-exploration. It's written in a way where I pause the reader. So I guide you through the steps of processing your emotions. Number one, my motto for this book is feel first, then ask. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't feel first, we're asking spirit from a state of reactivity. Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult to not just connect, but receive what they have to offer us when we're in that frazzled state. And it can come across, and I've had clients who have said to me, I feel like, I've asked the angels and I've asked my guides and it's never going to happen. And they don't hear me and it doesn't work. Like I've had that, but I can just tell they're in a state of reactivity. And I'm thinking, okay, they're not processing what they feel, because we have to show up and take responsibility. We don't just ask and like, okay, where's my order? For spirit, we actually have a responsibility to show up as high vibrational as we possibly can, because spirit runs a very high vibration consciousness and we run a physical vibration, and we want to lift our vibration and then they lower their vibration and here we meet. But the way to raise our vibration is we have to process our emotions. We can't minimize, block, shove them away, pretend that we don't have them.
Right.
That is the best way to raise your vibration.
Yeah. And I think I'm hearing you, and you said earlier, processing emotions, kind of try to paraphrase back, means first off, acknowledging them. Our emotions are what they are, as opposed to trying to stifle them or somehow live in an emotion-free life. That's not going to happen, or not in a healthy way. Right.
Yeah. Because we are spirit. So yeah, we connect to spirit, but we are spirit. We are one. And emotions are just like spirit. Their anatomy, the way they run, the frequency, they run on a frequency, they move, they're abundant, they're infinite, they help create that movement, they help create that connection, they help us evolve, they help us learn our lessons. We can't do this without them. What we came here to do. If I didn't feel disappointment or feel hurt, then I'm really not growing. But the thing is when I stay in those emotions. Some of the great ascended masters taught us, Jesus being one of them, Buddha being another one of them. They taught us about forgiveness. They taught us about love. They taught us about connection. They knew, right? Take things lightly. Don't hang on. Let go. Don't sit and shame yourself. But there's a process, and they gave us tools. They gave us spiritual tools to be able to do that. So that's what the book actually contains, the same cleanse that I created in the Emotional Detox book series. It's my signature method. And then I upgraded it to, I don't want to say upgrade because it's still an extremely valuable process in emotional detox. It's just each book gives you a different way to use those same steps, because my feeling is the steps work. Why? I'm not going to reinvent the wheel when something is so effective, but I am going to take different angles, because once you have something down, you're ready to grow and hear. But again, you can start wherever you're comfortable, because they're all the books are written in a way for as if you're new to the process.
Yeah. And it is a process, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's no quick fix, right?
Not a quick fix. No.
It's a mistake to expect that. But again, our guest today has been Sherianna Boyle. I will make sure there are links in the show notes to her website, the podcast, and the book, the most recent. The new book and the podcast are called Just Ask Spirit. Lots of other books. So hope people will go check that out, and the different services and coaching that Sherianna provides. So thank you for being a guest here. Like I to have a conversation like this about these topics, for me, honestly, is sometimes a bit of a struggle, because these are not topics and words and things that are part of my normal vocabulary. But I think you've given us as mistake makers, some things to reflect on here. So thank you for that. I hope I was able to be a good guide through this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your invitation is, just allowing me to be on the show. That's the thing, and giving everybody a voice to share their learnings with people. And I have a retreat coming up if anybody wants to attend. It's in January. So I'll be leading a weekend Just a Spirit retreat. So.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Sherianna, for being a guest here today. It's good to meet you through this. Thank you. Thanks again to Sherianna Boyle for joining us today. To learn more about her books, her work, her podcast, and more, look for links in the show notes, or you can go to markgraven.com/mistake296. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.